afternoon. My name is Melinda Herring, and I'm the Deputy Director of the Eurasia Center here in Washington, D.C. at the Atlantic Council. Thank you so much for joining us for yet another event about Nord Stream 2. This one is titled Pipeline to Controversy. If you've been following the news, you know that President Biden and his team chose to waive sanctions against Nord Stream 2 AG, and this may present a real challenge for transatlantic relations. We're here to discuss what's next. Will Congress force the president's hand? And how will the upcoming Biden-Putin summit be impacted? We're joined by four of our great experts. Ambassador Dan Fried, the Weiser Family Distinguished Fellow at the Atlantic Council. Dr. Agnia Grigas, a non-resident senior fellow at the Atlantic Council's Eurasia Center. Ambassador John Herbst, the director of our Eurasia Center. And Ambassador Richard Morningstar, founding chairman of the Atlantic Council's Global Energy Center. Thank you so much for joining us, and let's get started. Ambassador Fried, you are known as an advocate for a strong policy towards Russian revisionism, yet you have expressed concern about the U.S. sanctioning the Nord Stream 2 project. What is your appraisal of the Biden administration's decision?
I think they're conducting a defensible policy rather badly, by which I mean that Nord Stream 2 is a bad idea and involves strategic risks for Ukraine, for Central and Eastern Europe, and for all of Europe. I don't think sanctions are the way to deal with it, because I don't think it's practical to kill the pipeline with sanctions. And indeed, we learned today that Putin is crowing that the first section of Nord Stream 2's dual pipeline is complete. I don't know that he's right, but it wouldn't surprise me. Much depends now on whether the Americans, the Germans, with input from Ukraine, Poland, and others, can come up with a mitigation package to make the downside risks of Nord Stream 2 more shallow, less deep, less steep. The administration needs to do this, or they will, I predict, be unable to maintain the waivers. And this will get ugly. We'll see what they manage to do. There was a German delegation in town this week. I'm told the bilateral talks went well, but these discussions need to be broadened to include Ukrainians and Poles, or their substantive input, if this is going to be other than a train wreck.
Thanks a lot, Ambassador Fried. You always manage to make things fun at the beginning. Ambassador Morningstar, the administration has been signaling for some time that the decision was taken to protect the relationship with Germany so as not to sanction an ally, even though Congress was meticulous to avoid sanctioning German firms. The administration has also been talking to Berlin for months about this. What have the Germans offered to the Biden administration to make this decision less painful in Washington, where the Congress is quite upset?
Well, frankly, Melinda, I don't know what Germany has offered to the administration at this point. There have been obviously talks this week with very high-level German participants in those talks, and that what has been talked about specifically, I certainly have no knowledge. Now, both Dan and I have written about the kinds of things that should be being talked about, including how to protect the interests of Ukraine, the interests of Poland and Central and Eastern Europe, and we could get into more detail on that. But whether or not Germany is really stepping up to the plate at this point, I hope so, but I don't know. When I first heard about the waiver, I was shocked, and like many, felt that, gee, why are we issuing a waiver now, and what are we getting for it? What we don't know is what conversations took place behind the scenes prior to the issuance of those waivers, what the administration might be expecting from Germany, and whether or not to get whatever Germany is offering, they insisted that a waiver be given now so that that wouldn't look like they were being bullied. I don't know. And I think what Dan said is right. We have to see whether Germany steps up to the plate, and an agreement can be reached which would allow the administration to be able to go back to the Hill, for example, with a straight face and say, see, we really got something for this. I think there are a couple of things that we need to need to remember. First of all, with respect to domestic politics here in the United States, this means nothing, frankly. I don't think Biden is losing anything from a domestic political standpoint. There are issues on the Hill, obviously, and strong bipartisan support for sanctions, but there really hasn't been an indication yet that the Democrats are going to join with the Republicans to insist on mandatory sanctions with respect to Nord Stream. We'll see. I hope it turns out okay, but this all certainly came as a surprise to me, as it did to many others.
Absolutely. Thank you so much. Ambassador Herbst, the administration says, among other things, that it took the decision because the project was over 95% of the way done and unstoppable. Is that true, or does the decision itself make it unstoppable?
The administration is wrong and has mischaracterized the situation. Dan already pointed out that Putin announced today that the first of the two trunk lines making up the pipeline has been completed. We don't know if that's true or not. But even if it is true, they have to test the pipeline before it's commissioned. They have to certify it. And the certification process is under sanction right now. So they cannot proceed with certification as long as that's true. So the Biden administration would have to offer another unjustified concession for this to happen. The strong work from Congress going back to December of 2019, when they put down the first round of sanctions, and then a second round in December of 2020, stopped all work on the pipeline. The pipeline work was renewed as the Biden administration signaled a very soft approach, without justification. Dick and Dan are right that so far we've seen no reason whatsoever for this concession. No reason whatsoever. The Germans have offered bupkis, nichevo, as we say in Russian. And the Biden administration has offered no reason to Congress as to why they should ignore their stated intent of sanctioning the Hill. I partly agree with Dick that the Democrats have not responded strongly to this as a group. But of course, Senator Menendez, the head of the Foreign Relations Committee, has. Senator Shaheen, who is a prime mover of the sanctions, issued a strong statement this week saying that sanctions will come even if the project is completed. The question really is, where are Schumer and Durbin? You know, when Trump tried to play nasty games with Ukraine, the Republican senators stood up. And despite that, Mitch McConnell was belittled as Moscow Mitch. I hope the Democratic leadership is as strong in pushing back against their president, against a bad policy, as the Republican senators were.
John, I have a follow-up.
Very, very important.
A follow-up question for you, if you don't mind.
Please.
Is the Biden administration's calculus short-sighted? So they have said something. When the president spoke, he said that we have to fix our relationship with Germany. But we know that the leadership in Germany is likely to change. And if the polls are right, we're looking at the Greens taking a pretty big, they're probably going to be in charge. And we know they don't like Nord Stream 2. So isn't this just a short-sighted political calculation? Help us understand that, please.
It's not easy to understand or explain the Biden administration position. It's really rather sad because Biden campaigned as a person who's going to be strong on the transatlantic relationship and pushing back against Kremlin revisionism. And we're not seeing that over the past several weeks. Yes, Chancellor Merkel, I say somewhat reluctantly, has put her weight behind Nord Stream 2 because she wants to accommodate businessmen in Germany who unfortunately are only going to be Kremlin appeasers, Putin verstehers of the highest order. And yes, you're right, the Green Party is going to do very well in the upcoming elections, and they are dead set against them. Their leadership has said this project must die. So there's no apparent reason, there's no sense at all that this is in the American national interest. None whatsoever. That's what makes it so frustrating.
John, can I maybe just jump in on that issue? Because
please.
Newer, maybe some little bit of new information. I was on a roundtable earlier today. It was an off-the-record roundtable, but there were German think tank types as well as a member of the Green Party who was on the roundtable. And without violating the Chatham House rule, you know, I basically asked the question, well, has the administration cut the legs out from under you given that you're opposed, in fact, virtually all of those people were opposed to Nord Stream 2. And the answer was, well, we like American support, but we really need to settle this ourselves as to how to deal with Nord Stream 2. We think we can deal with it, although we like American support, although they didn't say it directly, they basically were saying, but don't sanction us.
Okay, interesting. Agnia, I want to bring you into the conversation. If
Sure.
Nord Stream 2 is completed, what will be its impact on gas supply in Europe? Moscow's relationship with Germany and ability to use gas as a geopolitical tool?
Well, first of all, Nord Stream 2 will double Russian gas supplies into Germany through the Baltic Sea route. So right now, Nord Stream 1 is 55 BCM, and it will bring it to 110 BCM. This will certainly be a negative for Europe's energy security. It will increase Europe's dependence on a single route for its gas supplies, greater concentrate through this Nord Stream pipeline trajectory. But this is all not happening in a vacuum as well. The gas markets have changed significantly in the last 10, 15 years. Today, we're really in a global gas market. And specifically in Europe, we can see that there are a lot more interconnector pipelines, there are reverse flows of pipelines, there are gas storage facilities, there are LNG import terminals. So essentially, this places a limit to the degree to which Russia could use Nord Stream 2 to really use it as a geopolitical weapon over Germany. Certainly the types of things where, dramatic price hikes or threats of gas cutoffs, hard arm tactics in terms of energy policy coercion, these will be limited by, just overall global energy markets and the interconnectedness of European gas markets. What concerns me, however, is, well, part of it is even how this project was implemented, with a lot of, Russian lobbying by co-opting of German interests. I mean, the prime example is the former Chancellor Gerhard Schroeder. So the implications of these pipelines is really the kind of corruption and special interest the pipeline will export to Germany.
Let me jump in with
Go ahead, please.
with 2 points. One, Agnes is absolutely right about the lousy origins of Nord Stream 2. Okay, just nails it. Secondly, she's also right that a lot of European and Ukrainian and Polish energy policies over the last 10 or 15 years have made all of them less vulnerable to Putin energy pressure. They're not out of the woods, but they're a lot better off than they were because of the things Agni mentioned: interconnectors, LNG terminals, different ways to limit Putin's ability to put leverage over Europe. So I think Nord Stream 2 is not as dangerous as it used to be, though it is certainly a political project and its origins are just awful, right? Gerhard Schroeder taking a Russian seat on the board after he negotiates a deal as chancellor. But here's, I think, I'm going to make a stab at explaining the administration position because John Herb said he just didn't understand it. And God knows I share a lot of John's frustrations. This is where I think they are. They don't like Nord Stream 2. They know it's a bad deal, but they're not sure the sanctions can kill it at anything like an acceptable price. Yes, there are elections coming up in Germany in September, and yes, the Greens hate it. And let's just for the record, the Greens are right, okay? Just like the Poles and Ukrainians are right. But the pipeline could be finished before the elections. If you're in the position of the Biden administration, are you sure you can kill it? We're in the position of the prisoner's dilemma. If you go for what you really want, you may end up worse than if you cut a deal now. So they're trying to cut a deal. Now, somebody is probably thinking, yeah, but what's the deal? What have the Germans put forward? And that is where the administration is at its weakest point. They have to come up with a deal And it can't be just a US-German deal. They have to hear what the Ukrainians, the Poles, the Balts need. They need that input. And the burden is on them. And they messed up the rollout of the policy, so they're behind the curve in terms of public perceptions. So they have to come up with a deal that is strong enough that the House Democrats can say, well, yeah, as Dick Morningstar said, yeah, we got something. So it has to be so strong that John Hurst will say, I hate Nord Stream 2, but this is something. This is something. And the Poles and Ukrainians are never, ever going to like Nord Stream 2, nor should they. I mean, they're right. It's a bad deal. But they have to be able to say two things. They have to be able to say in the end, yes, there are arrangements which protect our interests, and this wasn't negotiated without our input. The Poles have a saying, and others in the region have a saying, nothing about us without us.
Yep.
All right, they're right. We need to bring them in, both because it's substantively the right thing to do, and let's face it, the Biden administration needs to do this if any deal is going to be politically viable. So that's where I come out on this. That's my attempt at an explanation of what I think the Biden people are thinking. They're thinking they can get a decent enough deal, and that it gets them out of the prisoner's dilemma, and they're aware of what Agnes said, that thanks to European and Polish and Ukrainian energy policies over the last 10 to 15 years, Putin doesn't have the whip hand the way he did when he turned off the gas to Ukraine, during the Bush administration. We're better off. But yeah, if you're asking me whether Nord Stream 2 is a good thing, of course it's not. It's terrible. We're just dealing with what we've got, given the timing and our assets at the moment.
Great, thank you.
Melinda, can I add to that briefly?
Yeah, Dick, I wanted to ask you the same question. Is there some way to square the circle to reach an agreement that satisfies all the interests, or at least that mitigates the damage to the losers and reduces Biden's political exposure? So same question that
Right.
Dan answered.
Sure, but and let me get to that. But let me also say, and it's related. Where's the Biden administration coming from?
Yeah.
What we haven't mentioned, and I think very telling, were the president's comments to the press after the waiver was issued, in which he said, as I understand it, just from press reports, hey, this is going to happen anyway. The pipeline is going to be, it's 95% complete. It's not going to do any good. The sanctions aren't going to do any good. He basically said that directly. And I can't put myself in his mind, but my guess is that what he was thinking is, hey, we're trying to rebuild the transatlantic relationship. We have a lot of issues that we have to work with Germany on, whether it be climate, security issues, on and on and on, Iran, that we need to cooperate on. And this is an unnecessary irritant to the relationship. And given that the pipeline, in his view, again, I don't know exactly what was in his mind, but given that the pipeline is going to be completed, why not eliminate this as an irritant, and then hopefully get the kind of agreement that would be satisfactory, that would protect the interests of the parties, as well as get Germany's cooperation in any number of other areas, including reaching 2% of defense spending, including climate issues, and on and on and on. My guess is that's where he's coming from. It's not an outrageous position. It could have been handled, probably could have been handled differently. Why issue a waiver now when nobody was even expecting us to sanction those entities at this point? But again, we'll have to see what happens, whether or not there is a reasonable agreement, and such an agreement, in my view, would have to protect Ukraine's agreements with the agreement with Gazprom on transit through 2024, maybe expanding that, German cooperation on the Three Seas Initiative, Central and Eastern European energy security. I could go on and on and on. So the proof will be in the pudding.
Great, thank you. Ambassador Herbst, you follow Ukraine very, very closely. What are you hearing from the Ukrainians that you talk to about the waiver? How do they feel about this?
Before I answer that, I have to respond to my two colleagues. I am an equal opportunity critic. I criticize Republicans and Democrats. I don't carry water for either party on these foreign policy issues. And I think that Dan and Dick have provided the best possible explanation for a dreadful decision, a decision which cuts against American national interests in a serious way. And why do I say that? First, because, as I've already mentioned, Congress has demonstrated, albeit you had the Trump administration, which was agreed with Congress, that sanctions could stop the pipeline because no work was done on the pipeline following December 19 sanctions. So they could stop the pipeline. Two, I understand Biden's desire to make up with Germany. Trump treated Merkel terribly, cutting against our national interests. But Biden didn't have to touch Nord Stream 2. He could have simply said, I can't do this. Congress has spoken. So he took this up unnecessarily. But three, and this goes where Dick and Dan have also expressed dissatisfaction. The Biden administration has been in negotiations with the Germans since the end of January. We're now at the beginning of June. If you're going to have a real deal with the Germans, they should have offered us something already. Dan is as tough a diplomat as I've ever encountered, and Dick too. And they know when you're in a negotiation, you don't hand away your trump card with getting nothing back. So why the hell have they waived the sanctions without getting it from Germany? It makes no sense. And the fact that the Germans are in town this week and we're hearing things, maybe something positive is going to happen. Well, where the hell is it? Biden needs that. Biden needs it. He doesn't have it. So he looks really weak. And why in the world did he present this decision on the day that Blinken met with Lavrov, as if it was also concession to Moscow? Complete incompetence. Now, as to your question on Ukraine, they are deeply, deeply upset about this, and for good reason. And Putin underscored that reason today as he was trumpeting the opening of the first trunk line. He said, people talk about gas flow from Russia going through Ukraine going forward. And I think that's a fine idea as long as Ukraine takes positive steps, like stop defending its own sovereignty and territorial integrity. This decision was a loser. Congress should step up. Now, okay, I think I've spoken enough.
Thank you. Dan or Dick, do you want to respond?
Well, let me just say that John has a big, big point, okay? He's absolutely right. The burden is on the Biden administration to show that it has a deal, all right? I do not believe that if there is no deal, I don't think our current position is sustainable, and I fear the Congress will force through greater sanctions. There's already legislation up there to that effect. The Biden administration will have to come up with a deal. And as I said, it's got to meet the John Herbst test. John Herbst is never going to say that the Biden administration handled it well, and he's got a point, right? He's got a point. But he may say, and I'm guessing, knowing him pretty well, that he hopes he's able to say, gee, this is a better deal than I thought. This is a deal that takes care of people's basic interests. And by the way, Dick Morningstar talked about some of the elements of the deal. Here's one deal that's no good, which is an energy version of the Budapest Memorandum, right? Through which Ukraine gave up nuclear weapons in return for political guarantees from the US, Russia, and Great Britain. That's not good enough. This is obviously. This has got to be a deal which has enough teeth, enforceability, and concrete elements so that we're not relying on Vladimir Putin's good faith. Yeah, tall order. And just let the record show, it may turn out that John's right, that there's no deal and that the administration gave up its leverage and it looks like a bunch of idiots. But I'm not willing to say that yet. I'm not willing to say that yet. I think that the administration understands that it's got to come up with a good deal. I think it is made, I believe it's made clear to the Germans that basically my language, not theirs, God damn it, Joe, the Biden administration, they took a hit, now you got to step up. And I think the administration now needs to start talking seriously to the Poles and Ukrainians because they cannot be left on the side on this one. I mean, John's right about the Ukrainians. Boy, are they mad. And my Polish friends, not, the government and the liberal opposition kind of equally pissed off. And they have a point. So the Biden administration has to get itself out of a hole. But I will say, in their defense, they could do it. Now, this is, somebody could throw that back in my face later and say, they didn't come up with anything. I understand that. But I'm willing, understanding that the burden's on them, I'm willing to let them play this one out. Not that any of us have a choice. This is where we are. This is where we are.
Great, thank you. Agnia.
I'd like to, follow up a little bit on that as well.
Please.
Essentially, to what extent we can expect that gas transit through Ukraine will continue. And I have to say, I'm pretty skeptical that we will see long-term flows of Russian gas through Ukraine. And, I studied Russian gas transit policy for, a number of decades. It was the subject of my first book. And since the start of Putin's administration, he's used the policy of essentially eliminating gas transit states whenever they turned away from Russia politically. And if Ukraine remains, let's say, Western-leaning country, over time it will be most likely eliminated from the gas transit trade. I mean, it may remain a small fraction of the flows, but of course we know that will have a greatly negative impact on the Ukrainian pipeline system, which, if it's not used in significant capacity, will continue to fall into disrepair and disuse and so on. So I think, I don't know what kind of a deal could be struck to maintain the use of the Ukrainian pipeline system, what kind of leverage the Biden administration could have over Putin in that regard, if we've had difficulty coming to agreement with our allies, Germany, over such a question.
Great.
Maybe I could also respond on some of what's been talked about. Am I on mute?
No, you're good. Go.
You're good, Dick.
Okay. I understand, Agnew, what you're saying, and it would be difficult, but there are ways, at least to guarantee that present transit agreements, maybe insist on an extension of those transit agreements, literally to guarantee payment, have escrow accounts, there are different ways of handling it if the will was there. Just on the Russia situation and in responding to that, I basically agree with what Dan is saying. We have to wait and see. And it was a bad signal. The optics were terrible, I think, in what we did. It sent a bad signal to Russia, and Putin's statements today were manifestly unhelpful. But even that, I think we have to wait and see. Nord Stream is one issue. How tough is Biden going to be at the summit on cybersecurity? How tough is he going to be on Navalny? How tough is he going to be on other issues? Is he going to be able to show that we do have a will to take very serious action with respect to some of these other issues? I hope that will be the case. As much as we get Nord Stream becomes such a huge issue for all of us, everybody on this panel, and has been for years, it still is one issue. And we can't, one way or the other, we can't let it interfere with all of the other major issues that have to be worked through with our European friends. And we have to be absolutely sure we're as tough as nails in dealing with Putin.
That's a fair point. That's a very fair point. But Dick, would you mind taking a stab at the very good questions you posed? What do you expect from President Biden at the summit? Do you expect him? How forceful do you expect him to be on Navalny and on hacking? What are your guesses?
Well, again, you know, I certainly have no inside information whatsoever. Uh, Biden's a pretty pragmatic person. We may disagree with what he did on Nord Stream, but I think, frankly, this was his decision based on what he said to the press. And I think we may not totally agree with it, but I think he did it from a pragmatic standpoint. I hope that pragmatism works in dealing with Putin and making clear to Putin that we're not going to put up with a lot of what Russia's behavior has been in any number of those areas. Beyond that, I don't know. I mean, I just hope he does, and that he has credibility.
Great, Dan, Agnia, John. Any other predictions for the upcoming summit?
By 3 weeks ago, I would have said that the Biden administration had framed up its Russia policy pretty well. That is, stability and predictability, but pushing back against Russian aggression where we have to, and cooperation where possible. However, what's happened in 3 weeks? Nord Stream 2, which at best is clumsy, at worst, see John Herbst, but also new hacking, right? Russian hacking against another critical piece of infrastructure that was a meatpacking facility. Hacking into the USAID website. Russian talk of new military buildup. The Biden team may want predictability and stability in the relationship. Putin may want a confrontation because it serves his interests. So I think Dick, and I suspect John, all of us are, and Agna are all in agreement that Biden needs to make clear to Putin that simply making bilateral relations with Russia better is not our objective. Making sure Putin understands that the United States will resist his aggression and we will work with our allies to that end is critical. And I think the Biden people understand that. Now, again, Nord Stream 2 has been handled at best in a clumsy way. And we're going to see whether it was a strategic blunder or simply tactical missteps. We'll see. Burdens on them. But I think the message to the world has to be that the United States is going to work with its allies to deal with the authoritarians, both Putin in a kind of acute aggressive sense and China in a longer term sense. And the other message that the Biden team needs to convey is that we're not going to play cheap Machiavelli, right? Like high school kids playing diplomacy. We're not going to do a dirty deal with Putin over the heads of anybody else, Ukraine or anybody else, to have them alongside on China. That's an amateur's view, as a primitive amateur's view of what strategy looks like. That's not what strategy looks like. Strategy looks like sticking with your friends and dealing with your adversaries in a way that is both principled and at the margins, tactically flexible, but not by selling out your principles or your friends.
Well put. Thank you so much. Let's move to our questions. We thank you, audience. We have a number of excellent questions. I want to start first with our good friend, Deborah Kagan. Deborah, great to have you with us. She says, I believe it's a strategic blunder and plays directly into the Russian narrative that this is just about Ukraine or just about Poland or just about Lithuania. That allows Russia to split Europe and feeds the nature of those in Germany who will make bundles on this. That's a good point, Deborah. Her question is this: why is the administration not focused on the big piece of the sheer amount of money this will give Putin to continue the malign activities that Europe claims it cannot abide? And why would a U.S. president actually say, I'm not going to do anything because it is because the pipeline is a fait accompli? What message do you think that that sends to Putin? By the way, the German Green candidate for chancellor gave a pretty bold interview in Bild today, soundly denouncing Nord Stream 2. Who wants to take Deborah's question? John?
I mean, look, I agree completely with Deborah's point. Again, Nord Stream 2 project is bad from so many angles. And perhaps the most important is not just the money that gives Putin to pursue his malign policies, but again, the strengthening of the relationship between German business community or parts of the German business community and Russia. And that community then becomes advocates for Putin's policies. You know, the Putin verstehe par excellence. And that is very much cutting against American interests, and for that matter, European interests. We should all remember that a majority of the EU countries do not like Nord Stream 2, would like to see the US sanctions.
Great, thank you. Thomas O'Donnell says, it is not clear here that the Greens can or will kill Nord Stream 2. They're falling in the polls and at best would have to trade a lot in a three-way coalition to kill it. He said, have no illusions. The leader of the Greens are explicitly anti-NATO, anti-2%, anti-nuclear weapon responsibilities, and anti-weapons to Ukraine. And here he says night goggles, etc. are okay. They'll likely support the CDU, SPB, hydrogen from Gazprom schemes. Ambassador Fried, Ambassador Morningstar, either of you want to respond to that?
Yeah, maybe, you know, I could start with that. Yeah, I mean, you know, the Green Party isn't necessarily, depending on what role they play in the coalition, you know, we're certainly not going to agree with everything they stand for. And I think even they would say it's unlikely, at least in the short term, that Nord Stream 2 could be stopped. I think one issue with respect to Nord Stream that we haven't really paid enough attention to, perhaps even in this conversation, is, and it relates to the Green Party, is the green impact. And why a Nord Stream 2 pipeline, when we're going through the energy transition, where there are real questions as to what gas demand is going to be, and that Germany and the Green Party will focus on other sources of energy rather than prolonging reliance on gas. And so I think that might be where the Green Party is, you know, shifts public opinion in Germany with respect to Nord Stream over, if not the short term, over the midterm. And I think raises a lot of questions as to the Nord Stream 2 assets, as to how useful they're going to be. You know, again, we'll see.
I'd like to follow up on that. Absolutely. I mean, general assessments show that European gas demand is not going to increase. At best, it's plateaued, and realistically, it's probably going to decline, specifically in Germany. In Germany is diversifying away from fossil fuels. I mean, it has you know, large programs in place. So, you know, Nord Stream 2 is coming certainly at a time when it's, you know, not needed. At the same time, there are alternatives, as I had outlined. I mean, there's LNG import potential, there are reverse flows, the Southern Gas Corridor has come online, renewables. But what's significant about this, even though you can say the demand is not going to grow for it or even be there long term, this is a tremendous success for Russia. The fact that they have managed to put in place this long-term, significant infrastructure. And by putting this infrastructure in place, they're in a way managing to lock in part of the market, part of the German market. And I think with continued lobbying and special interests and stoking those, I think, you know, that pipeline will probably be used, not because it's economic, not because there's a demand for it, not because there's alternatives.
Agnia, I've got another question for you. John Roberts wants to know, is it possible that Nord Stream and Nord Stream 2 are the principal reason why Ukraine will finally start to get its act together on energy reform of its own gas sector, curbing imports and boosting energy efficiency? What do you say?
Well, I did make that point that there could be a, you know, silver lining to this in one of my books, maybe in The New Geopolitics of Natural Gas, or maybe the Beyond Crimea. But, you know, the fact is Ukraine's dependence on Russian gas transit revenues, I think, has created and bred more corruption in the country. Ukraine has significant natural energy resources, I mean, oil and gas in its territory. It could be completely independent from Russian gas imports. It could become actually an exporter if, you know, their energy sector was well managed, and got rid of some of its corruption. So that could be a potential silver lining, probably for the long term, I would say.
Great. Thank you so much. Keep those questions coming. We've got a number of them. Bogdan Mihailov says, John is in a fighting mood. This is good to see. And he has a couple of questions. He says, assuming it's a done deal and Nord Stream goes ahead, what concessions or compensation can Ukraine reasonably expect? John Herbst or Dan Fried?
All right, I'll take a first shot at it. First, again, I don't think this project is necessarily done, and I think it would be foolish to go down that road. But things that might be of real value would be a map for Ukraine to NATO, because we know Germany was perhaps the principal obstacle along with France. But I don't think there's any indication. I mean, we have zero indication from Germany that's willing to offer anything for this, and I think it's unrealistic to expect they'd be offering that.
I think, and I'm not privy to any of the confidential information, but I think the arrangements being discussed are apt to be in the energy field. Hey, Ukraine is far less dependent on Russian gas than it used to be, but it gets between $2 and $3 billion a year in transit fees. So if the Russians cut the use of the Ukrainian pipeline, it loses those transit fees. There might be arrangements made to make it a lot harder for Russia to cut that or to compensate Ukraine for that. But that's, the transit fees are one big issue. The Ukrainians have sometimes pointed out, and John knows this more than I do, that if the Russians launch a new military offensive against Ukraine, it might endanger the pipeline, so they're less likely to do it. Therefore, their security, if that pipeline is taken out of service, their security could be threatened. Well, I think whatever arrangements are made for Ukraine, it has to take account of both their economic interests and their larger security interests. I agree with John. I don't think a map for Ukraine is in the cards, but I don't think that's the way I would go. I would look, if I were Ukraine, I would look to energy. Also, I'm a big believer in the use of contingent sanctions. That is, we could prepare sanctions which would against Russian energy investment, which we could bring to bear if the Russians messed around. That's not the whole of the deal, but that could be part of it. Again, I don't want to get into the details because I don't know them. I don't know what's on the table. But the Ukrainians have to be part of that conversation. It will not do for Americans to think what the Ukrainians need. We have to talk to the Ukrainians.
Great.
Yeah, and also, and I agree, Dan, with all of what you said. And there are ways to protect Ukraine. Although Germany hasn't been clear on yet, maybe they are in Washington, on what they would do. German officials have at least recognized in general that Ukraine needs to be protected as part of this whole situation. We'll see how that ends up.
Dan and Dick, are you ready for the gotcha question? I've got a good one for you. Okay, here it comes. Andreas Simoni wants to know, how does this all fit with Biden's announcement about combating corruption being the priority when this is a bit of an exaggeration, but when this is the single worst case of corruption in recent history?
Andras is a very wise man, and he's a damned effective diplomat. And that question is another example of why. I would put it this way. The Biden administration comes to office and Nord Stream 2 has been around for a long time. The corrupt origins of Nord Stream, are in the past. If the Biden administration is serious about its anti-corruption strategy, that's a big deal. And it ought to include identifying and going after, let us say, corrupt Russian money in general and Putin's money in particular. That's a big deal. And that has to be, that to be effective, it needs to be a US, UK, European joint project, right? And there are ways to do this. This is a big deal. If you want to get off the back foot and start, start engaging where it counts, that's one way to do it. So I would say to Andras, yeah, fair point. Okay. But the question is, what do we do now? What do we do now? And then you certainly want Andras in the room, figuring out your next actions, because he's awfully good at that.
Great, thank you. Dick, any thoughts?
Oh, I think that's right, but I also think Andras is right. We have to go after corruption, and we have to encourage Germany to do the same thing within Germany with respect to this deal. But so yes, I think it's a legitimate issue. I don't think it's necessarily at cross purposes. And I don't think one can say, well, just because Biden's gone soft on Nord Stream 2 means that we're not after corruption. And in fact, Andras and I wrote an article a few years ago for the Huffington Post in talking about things like rule of law and pushing for democracy and so forth, that there is a double standard sometimes, and that's the way it is. But I do think that this should be an important issue in connection with Nord Stream.
Thank you. Agneta, go ahead.
I don't think Biden should, has an excuse just simply because he recently came into the presidency. Nord Stream 1 was built under the Obama administration. Plans for Nord Stream 2 were laid under the Obama administration. Okay, Nord Stream 2 was built under the Trump administration. But this is a long ongoing issue. And yes, now we're at the very tail end of it, but I think we can see, it's probably represents successive failures of several administrations.
That's a very fair point. Agneta, another more technical question for you, if you don't mind, from Greg Smith. He says, what will be the impact of Nord Stream on global gas prices? Could it lead to a sharp spike in prices for other gas markets, as there will be supply constraints from Russia?
Well, based on the kind of global gas market conditions right now, I doubt Gazprom could easily put a squeeze on Germany and on this pipeline. So I doubt that there would be a sharp spike in gas prices. I mean, of course, if there's some sort of unexpected political disagreements in the future, I mean, there could be a potential impact. But again, I don't see that Russia would be able to leverage to the same extent its kind of gas geopolitical weapon over Germany through Nord Stream 2 as it used to do, in Ukraine and Poland and Central and Eastern Europe. But I think there will be more, special interests, corruption, lobbying, effort to influence policy.
Oh, thank you so much.
Can I just jump in on that?
Mm-hmm.
I agree with that. But I think the market is very different now. And one of the reasons why Nord Stream 2 may suffer, even if it goes forward, is that piped gas is just not as flexible as LNG. And as long as LNG is available and there are spot prices for LNG, that's going to make it virtually impossible for Gazprom, for example, with a fixed pipeline to dictate what prices are going to be, and ultimately, I think that it forces Gazprom to act competitively and transparently. The alternatives of LNG and other sources of energy are absolutely critical to avoid Russia using gas as a political weapon in Central and Eastern Europe. The Ukraine issue, it's a whole nother issue.
That is certainly right. And in recent years, the Poles, the Lithuanians have acted on that and started building LNG facilities, as well as the Poles having built an alternative pipeline. So it's not like they've been sitting on their hands complaining. They've been actually doing things to deprive Putin of this leverage.
And the surprising factor is, that Germany, on the other hand, has not built an LNG import terminal, despite being the largest gas importer in Europe.
Well, they say they're going to do it as part of the solution to Nord Stream 2.
Look, if you want to talk about German energy policy, they decide to zero out nuclear. At the same time, they're reducing coal because of greenhouse gas issues, which and therefore, possibly in a bit of panic, they fall for this line on Nord Stream 1. So, yeah, that is not a policy to be studied in the textbooks, except as a cautionary note. You're quite right.
Thank you so much. I'm going to go to John Herbst. I have a great question. Is anyone considering a significantly increased military risk to Ukraine from the inevitable transition to Nord Stream 2 supplies to Europe? Has the U.S. studied the Turkmenistan case with the pipeline explosion in 2009?
Look, I think Dan's already made the key point on this. The fact that significant Russian revenues for gas to Europe went through the Ukrainian pipeline was a caution to Moscow in the way it waged its war in Donbass. So if you remove the need for Russian revenues via that pipeline, the chance of Moscow doing additional dangerous things in its current war on Ukraine in the east goes way up. That is the principal thing. But the questioner is also smart to point out explosions on the pipeline to Turkmenistan, explosions on pipelines supplying gas to Georgia, when Moscow had an interest in increasing pressure on Turkmenistan and Georgia. So those risks also go up. Again, from virtually any way you look at this, Nord Stream 2 is a bad deal for Europe, for the United States, and we need to make sure it stops.
Great. Ambassador Herbst, another question for you. How do you assess the likelihood of congressional action, and in particular, the likelihood of success of the Cruz Amendment, which seeks to require the president to sanction Nord Stream 2 AG, Matthias Warnig, and other individuals?
Well, it's clear that there are some senators who are truly incensed about this. Senators Menendez and Shaheen has already mentioned. Menendez is an important spot as the head of the SFRC, but it really depends upon the leadership in the Senate. And we know that Senators Durbin and Schumer have by and large expressed support for Ukraine, support for pushing back against Kremlin revisionism, Kremlin provocations. And I know that efforts are underway right now to make sure that such measures can pass in the Senate. But I'm not in a position to say how this will turn out. I think we need to watch and see.
Okay, fair enough.
Actually, but there's one more point, though, worth mentioning, which has not yet come up. It's clear, again, that this pipeline is a big boost for Russia. And the same administration which shut down American jobs with the Keystone Pipeline has basically given a free pass to Nord Stream 2. And I think this may be a factor in the way this plays out in politics in the United States.
Wonderful, thank you. A question for Agnia and Dick. This is from Ambassador Rich Kozlerich. He says, don't we need to consider U.S. policy toward Nord Stream and Turk Stream together? Agnia, you want to go first?
Absolutely. I mean, there are similar projects. I think there was more hopes that, the Nord Stream 2 project is a larger project. It goes directly to Germany, the largest European gas market. I think there were maybe more hopes that it could be stopped. But yes, I mean, these are essentially similar types of projects. Russian gas being diverted away from existing pipeline routes through Eastern Europe, through alternative direct routes into Central Europe or into Western Europe.
Yeah, I think I've always been a strong proponent of Turk Stream being as important an issue as Nord Stream. There are different legal considerations with respect to the third energy package, the EU's third energy package, but the EU needs to make sure that their regulations are complied with. My concern about Turk Stream is what effect does it have on alternative sources of energy coming into southeastern and central and eastern Europe from the Mediterranean, from the southern gas corridor. Greece wants to be has dreams of being a hub with respect to energy. There's LNG that can come in through Greece and then go through the Greece-Bulgaria interconnector into Bulgaria and further into the Balkans. And yeah, I mean, that Turk Stream is going to create a lot of competition to that. So I've been, for a few years, I've been pushing Greece and other European countries in that region to look carefully at what effect Turk Stream is having, and to be sure that its views are known in Brussels.
Thank
And
you.
Nord Stream and Turk Stream are not coincidental. Again, Germany is Russia's largest gas market in Europe, and Turkey is its second largest gas market in Europe. So both of these projects are essentially for Russia to try to hold on to its two most significant markets. As there's more competition, LNG, Southern Gas Corridor, and so on and on.
Thank you. Thanks so much. Last question to Ambassador Morningstar. This is from Voice of America's Russian service. This is from Danila. He says, energy specialists say Nord Stream 2 is quite excessive for the energy supply for Europe, and it's a rather political project for Russia. We've been over this many, many times, but this is the question. Do you believe that Germany could effectively put pressure on Moscow by saying it can switch off this pipeline at any time?
Oh, I don't know. Germany can say what it wants. It's a question whether it's believable. Yeah, I suppose Germany could turn on or off the pipeline depending on what the politics are. That's all very hypothetical. I think that it's a very unlikely scenario. I don't think them saying something like that today would put any pressure on Russia.
Great. Thank you so much. Go ahead. You have the last word, Ambassador Fried. Go ahead.
There's a longer term dynamic we need to keep in mind. I mean, this is a serious discussion, and it's illuminating, but Putinism rests on the sale of raw materials. It's a value extracted, not a value added economy. And as long as Putinism keeps deepening its oppression at home, it's not going to become a value added economy. I have spoken to a serious scholar who is studying the longer term, what he considers to be the longer term decline of Russian export revenues from raw materials, including energy exports, and it is inexorable and devastating. Not this year, not next year, but you're talking about kind of a massive vice that Russia is going to find itself in if it doesn't reform. It could reform. Russians are smart. We know that because they're awfully good when they get to Silicon Valley, but they can't do that in Russia, not under Putin. So let's remember, for all of our problems, and God knows the United States has plenty these days, I'd rather have ours than Putin's. I really would. It's right that we're debating Nord Stream 2, okay? We're trying to, take where we are and peer our way through, the fog into the future. But just let's remember what we're dealing with. Putinism is awful in the immediate term, as was the Soviet Union, which appeared awfully powerful in the early 1980s. How'd that turn out? How did that turn out? We should, even as we're looking for mitigation strategies for Nord Stream 2, or if John's right, try to kill it outright. Okay, worthy discussion, but let's also support democracy and transformation in Ukraine. Let's support democracy in Belarus. Let us support the courageous democratic activists inside Russia itself. This isn't new. We figured out how to do this stuff, under a little bit under Jimmy Carter and a lot more under Ronald Reagan. Best Soviet policy we ever had under George P. Shultz. So let's remember what we're dealing with. It's rough now, but we pull ourselves together and get together with the Europeans. And opinion in Europe, thanks to Putin, is beginning to shift in a better direction from my point of view. We can do this.
Absolutely. I can't put it any better. Thank you so much for those concluding remarks. Thank you for joining us. It's always a pleasure to bring the Atlantic Council family together to discuss Nord Stream 2. Have a wonderful weekend. Stay tuned on our website. Have a look at our events page. See if there's anything else that grabs you. We look forward to seeing you next time. Thank you and goodbye.
Great job, Melinda. Thank you.